we ready, everybody, to get rid of guilt? I am so ready. I am David Stone. I am the founder, co-founder of I-FearlessTV, and I am here tonight to share with you the secrets of getting rid of guilt from your life. Who needs it in their lives? We're going to spend an hour, maybe an hour and a few minutes together here, and I am so excited about sharing with you how to get guilt out of your life, because we just don't need it. It's like a 50-pound bag of stuff that you're carrying around, and you just don't need to carry that kind of guilt with you. So shall we go? What I'm going to be doing is I'm going to pop out into the little corner here for a bit. Just see how I do that. There we go. There we go. All right, so I'll be here in the corner, up in this little corner with you, and I will be talking you through this. Take some notes, and I want to share with you, because this is something that I've managed to get out of my life, and I want you to get out of your life. Can you imagine sitting there on that beach, looking at that water, enjoying that sunshine without one shred of guilt? I should be doing this. I ought to be doing that. I shouldn't be doing this. I ought to be doing something else. Oh, what will so-and-so say? Who needs that in their lives? So we're going to get rid of that tonight, right here, right now. So let's dive into this, shall we? All right, that's me. This is me here too, but that's me there, standing on some rocks. And who am I to tell you about living guilt-free? Well, like I said, I'm the co-founder of I-Fearless, and our mission is to help people, help you get guilt out of your life. And I'm so happy to do that. Here's me also. You know, I can take formal portraits as well, but you'll never catch me being ever so formal with a shirt and tie. Yeah, I own a tie, but I don't wear it very often. Now, what I'm going to do tonight, right here, is I'm going to show you a few things. I'm going to give you some clues. And the first thing I'm going to show you is how to relieve guilt in a very healthy and a very liberating kind of way. Not in the crush it down, ignore it, ignore everybody else kind of way that just ends up exploding with us. No, I'm going to show you how to process it, relieve it, release that guilt that we all carry around in a very, very healthy kind of way, in a growing kind of way that allows you to become who you really want. That's the first thing I'm going to do. The second thing I'm going to do is I'm going to show you how to get rid of the emotional pain that guilt brings and the self-sabotaging behavior that often accompanies it. Because what happens is when we are suffering guilt, when guilt is something that is a presence in our lives, we feel emotional pain, don't we? And it's not pleasant. I'm walking around doing one thing, believing I'm supposed to be doing something else, and that creates tension. It creates a dynamic tension inside your mind, inside your emotions, and it's painful. We can get rid of that. Now, the other thing that happens when we have that emotional pain and that tension inside us between what we think we're supposed to do and what we're actually doing, we start sabotaging ourselves, not necessarily consciously, but we undermine our performance. So I don't believe that I'm supposed to be doing this, so I will do things that undermine my ability and make me fail at the things that I want to try in order to align myself with the beliefs that the guilt has put into my brain. And I don't want you to have to do that anymore. So I want you to remove that. I'm going to show you how to do that. I'm also going to show you how to absolutely revel in the pleasure that you can feel as you release this guilt, and that you can have the relief and the joy and the self-esteem and that positive forward progress, because guilt holds you back. Guilt, it tells you, no, remember, you're guilty of something. If you're feeling guilt, you believe you're guilty of something, and guilty people don't deserve joy. Guilty people don't deserve to have success or happiness. But when we get rid of that guilt and we no longer feel guilty then you can have all that joy and all that pleasure and all that success that you absolutely want to have, because this genuinely is 100-pound load that you're carrying around, and it slows you down and it stymies you in the things that you're trying to do. So that's what I'm going to show you how to do right here within the next hour. Now, I want you to stick around, all right? Because what that means, and when I say stick around, I'm not asking you to stick around for long, but what that means is I want you to pay attention. And that means that I'd like you to close out everything else. We've all got so many distractions. I've got your phone there, and there's Facebook, and there's Twitter, and there's Pinterest. Now I know you're on Facebook right now, but please stay focused on this event, shall we? Rather than going and cruising around or talking on the phone or anything, because it's only when we pay attention that we can start absorbing the material and start to make it part of who we are. And then you can have success with it. All right? That's what I want for you. So stick around, pay attention, turn off all the other distractions, and let's go. Now, let's get back to me. My favorite subject, everybody's favorite subject, right? But why is it important? Why do you need to know me? Well, as I said, I'm the co-founder of I-Fearless. This company, this website, these programs are dedicated to helping you relieve yourself of the anxiety, of the fear, of the worries, of the self-doubt, of the guilt, all those negative emotions that hold us back. That's what I've done. Now, how am I qualified? Well, there's another picture of me. That's me, and if you squint closely, way down at the bottom of that picture, it says, I think it says June of 1962. So there's an idea of how old I was. And that picture, if you know anything about it, that's me on my first communion day, all right? And which means I was brought up Catholic. And it doesn't matter what tradition you were brought up in, it comes with loads and loads of shoulds and ought tos and behave this way, and that's bad, and this is good, right? We're just overloaded with it. Those other characters, yeah, well, those my brothers and my sister. There was another one yet to come who hadn't showed up there in June of 62. But anyway, there I am, innocent little kid getting loaded on with all these guilt trips that we get later on, layer after layer after layer of this is what you ought to do, and this is how you behave, and that's not good, and we don't approve of that. And then you grow up with that, and you carry it through your entire life, and it just builds up the anxiety, and it builds up the worry, and it builds up that guilt. I'm guilty of something. I'm guilty of following my own desires. I'm guilty of having ideas that aren't approved of. And I'm sure some of you can relate to that, depending on the traditions you were brought up in, or the family you were brought up in, or the relatives that you had, the teachers, the coaches, the religious leaders. They lay it on us, and then we carry it around, that load. Now, I grew up and I became a speaker. I do a lot of public speaking. That's me standing behind the podium somewhere. I don't know where. But I do a lot of that, and I share my ideas. I've been very successful. I've been all the way around the world sharing my ideas and sharing with other people. And yes, I've had a lot of success, but I carried with me all that time the guilt, the anxiety, the worry, the self-doubt, the imposter syndrome. How many of you have that, right? We're all carrying around, what right do I have to be here? And so I'd be standing behind a podium like that, looking out at a group of 500 people that I'm talking to, and thinking in my head, I'm not supposed to be here. People like me don't do things like this. And you know what I managed to do? Remember we talked about that self-sabotage thing? Well, about 10 years ago, 11 years ago now, I actually ended up homeless for about a month. I didn't have a picture of myself. I didn't take a selfie, but I was sleeping in my car. And how did I get there? I got there because of all these negative emotions that I was carrying around and the self-sabotaging behavior that goes with it. And eventually my worst nightmares, my worst fears came true. And at the time, it seemed like the worst thing that could possibly happen. But today, I'll tell you, it's one of the best things that ever happened to me because it woke me up. said, hey, what's going on here? There's something going on that you got to figure it out. And what I decided and what I learned as I started studying myself and learning more and more about how this noggin works and what the machinery inside there, what it's doing, and what the voices that I'm talking to myself with and the messages I'm giving myself are all the ones that I was trained and told that I'm supposed to give myself. Don't get a swelled head. No, don't try that. You'll never be good at those kinds of things. And guess what? I proved it right there. I managed to prove that I couldn't be good at it. And so I realized, I started thinking about it. And of course, my first instinct, I want to blame everybody else, blame and complain. Well, it was my upbringing. It was my lack of opportunities. It was the government, whoever it was. There's 1,000 people that complain. But the more I blamed and complained, the less anything changed, right? Nobody was jumping up and saying, oh, David, I'm so sorry. Let me change that for you and correct things so that your life can be what you want it to be. Nobody was jumping up to do that. And as I thought about it, I started realizing through all the various things and experiences I had, the negative ones, the only common denominator, the only thing that was present in all of them was me. I was the common denominator, and I finally woke up and said, well, maybe I'm the problem. And that's when I started studying myself, and I started studying how my mind works, and I started studying my thoughts and my beliefs and what I was taught and how that jived with what I actually deep inside believed myself. And the tension that existed between those two things. And that was what was starting to undermine me. Not starting to, it had done a fabulous job of undermining me. Now, hopefully none of you have to go through that, what I went through. But it was a huge wake-up call. And at that point, I said, okay, this won't do anymore. I'm a smart guy. I can figure this out. And I've spent the rest of the time since then, the last 10, 11 years, studying everything I could to learn about myself and to learn about how our minds work and how we fool ourselves and how we undermine ourselves and how we trick ourselves and how we sabotage ourselves. And I don't want that for me anymore, and I don't want it for you. So let's switch gears here, all right? I want you to start imagining. I want you to start thinking about what your life could be like if you didn't have any guilt at all. If there was no guilt whatsoever. If there wasn't a single should or a single ought to. I like to say we don't want to should all over ourselves, do we? That makes a mess that we have to clean up. What would your life be like? What would you do? What would you try? What would you imagine that you could accomplish if you weren't carrying that load of guilt around? If you didn't have to worry about what your mother might say, what your business colleagues might say, what your siblings might say, what your children might say, if you were to try the things that you're dreaming about. What if you didn't have to carry any of that and those weren't considerations at all? What might you try? Well, that's what I'm going to show you. I'm going to show you how. You don't have to just imagine it. You can do it. You can completely remove guilt from as a negative emotion in your life. You don't have to have it. It is not mandatory. They like you to think it's mandatory, and they like to pile it on. I like to say, is your only mode of transportation a guilt trip? Is that the only time you get out of the house is to go on a guilt trip? That's no good. I want you to have wonderful trips. Yeah, I know we're kind of stuck in the house here these days, but it's coming back, and I want you to be able to pursue whatever dreams you have, whatever dreams you want to dream about. I don't want you to be looking at the barriers that other people impose on you. Other people have said you could or you shouldn't. You can do this, but you shouldn't do that. Let's tear it out of our lives right here, right now, shall we? And we're going to do this by separating some myths from some facts, because there's a whole lot of myths floating around about guilt. In fact, there's 3 major myths that we're going to blow out of the water right here now. And when you realize that you think, oh, okay, maybe I've been, without necessarily being consciously aware, maybe I've been buying into these myths and operating my life based on that. You know, all the decisions on the actions that we take in our lives are based on our beliefs. I believe that I'm supposed to do this. I believe that this is how a person like me behaves. Now, if that belief has been put there by somebody else and it doesn't jive with what your true beliefs are, that's where the tension starts coming up. So we're going to take these myths and we're going to blow them right out of the water. Let's dive in right now, shall we? Myth number one. Myth number one says that guilt is somehow deeply rooted in there in your unresolved mommy issues or daddy issues. You know, let's come right back to Sigmund Freud. And the only way you'll ever be able to get rid of guilt is by lying on a couch and paying a therapist or a psychiatrist or something a lot of money to try and work through all these issues and do regression therapy. No, guilt is not deeply rooted in your mommy or daddy issues. Now, some of your guilt may have been started back then, but you don't have to go deep and lie on a psychiatrist's couch in order to get rid of it. You can get rid of it all by yourself. Let's learn where guilt comes from, because guilt doesn't work that way at all. Guilt is actually a very simple thing. The real culprit, the real criminal behind guilt is simply some misguided thinking that you and I do. Our thinking is a little off kilter, and that creates a pothole in your emotions that we run into regularly and hurts us. You know, if you're driving along a road that's full of potholes, you can't go fast, you can't go where you want, and your car is in danger of being damaged in some kind of way, isn't it? Just like my life was damaged by the guilt and the anxiety that I carried around with me all this time. It got damaged to the point where I didn't even have a place to live. And then when we realize that it's misguided thinking, all we have to do is shift our thinking. And when we shift our thinking and get it aligned with how things really are, and get it aligned with who you really are, then suddenly the guilt goes and your life just takes off. And now you're driving along that interstate highway and the pavement is smooth. You can go as fast as you want. That's what you can do. So let's look at this culprit. Let's look at this misguided thinking. Where does it actually come from, shall we? Well, here's the gist of it. I want you to think about guilt as a gap. See this gap here? There's two cliffs, and there's a big distance in between, and that gap is dangerous. You might fall down there. And what is these two cliffs? Well, on the one hand, the one cliff is what you believe. Deep down inside, what you believe about the world, what you believe about yourself, what you believe about right and wrong, what you believe about good and bad. Those are your core beliefs. That's on the one side of this chasm. On the other side of the chasm is your behaviors, what you do on a daily basis. So on the one hand, here's what I believe, and the other hand, here's what I do. Here's how I act. And anytime there's a gap between those two, that's what we call the guilt gap. Because now what we've got is a tension, a conflict between what I believe in myself and how I'm acting. So if I believe that good people don't shoplift, let's use a radical example. All right. And then I find myself, you know, I was reading an article just the other day about how grocery stores these days, with all their self-checkout that goes on, and so many people, apparently it's really easy, and there's all kinds of tricks that people use, and the losses are incredible, but the stores say, well, it's still a lower cost than hiring cashiers to do it for you. How sad is that? And yet we got all these people that literally steal stuff from the grocery store. Now, if you're a person who believes that you're a good person does not steal from the grocery store, and yet here you are at that self-checkout, and you just sort of slip the bananas into the bag without running them, putting them on the scale. Well, you've created this guilt gap. Or if you believe that, a good son calls his mother every Sunday afternoon, and then you skip a Sunday afternoon and you don't call mom, well, now we've got the guilt gap, don't we? That's how it's created. It's simply this gap, this distance, this difference between what you believe and what you do. What you feel in your heart of hearts and the actions that you take. That's the guilt gap. And so, now that we understand that, what we need to do is close it. Because the uncomfortable feeling that we get, and guilt is a very uncomfortable feeling. It's a painful feeling inside us, isn't it? It can hurt your stomach and give you headaches. It can give all kinds of stuff. Well, that uncomfortable feeling between those two precipices, that gap, that's guilt. And of course, the bigger the gap, the more uncomfortable this feeling becomes. Because if there's a really big gap, here's what I believe, and yet here's how I'm acting, well, that's a big gap, and that's going to cause a lot of tension, a big stretch between what I believe and what I do. That's going to be very painful, very uncomfortable for you, and that causes a tremendous amount of guilt. And what we need to do is close up that gap, don't we? We need to close the gap between our beliefs and our actions. Between our beliefs and our actions, we have to close that gap. Now, it doesn't take too much thinking to believe that, say, okay, how do I close that? Well, guess what? There's two variables there, my beliefs and my actions. One or the other, or a little bit of both, is going to have to change in order to close that gap, isn't it? I'm either going to have to change my beliefs, or I'm going to have to change my actions, one or the other, to relieve the guilt. Let me give you a couple of examples, all right? When I was in the 8th grade, so what was I, 12, 13 years old maybe, and just coming into being a teenager. And when I was in the 8th grade, I was not one of the cool kids, all right? Now, that was my perception, of course. Maybe there were other people, I couldn't go back now and poll everybody and ask them, well, did you think I was one of the cool kids or not? But in my mind, my beliefs, I was not one of the cool kids. But of course, when you're 13 years old, you desperately want to be one of the cool kids, don't you? And so, what do? How do you close? So I felt bad about that. I wanted to close that gap. And so what do you do to be one of the cool kids? You start hanging out with the kids who are considered cool. Now, the interesting thing is in the 8th grade, the kids who might be considered cool aren't necessarily the kids you want to hang out with, because, when you're 13 and the testosterone's starting to pump through your veins and all the rest of it, you want to be a bit of a bad boy. They're the cool kids. And so what I finally, suddenly found myself hanging out with these kids who were very cool and yet not very nice. And how did I recognize that? Well, one afternoon, I find myself in the boys' bathroom at school with me and the head of the cool kids and some poor little kid in the 5th or 6th grade, and we're beating up on him. We're bullying him. And I suddenly think, whoa, just a minute here. Okay, so my beliefs, I believe I'm a nice guy. I may not be one of the cool kids, but I believe myself to be a nice, kind person. And yet here I am bullying a kid that's younger than me and helpless. I'm bigger than he is. He can't help himself. So there's this huge gap that I've got. And my behavior was violating my beliefs about myself. Now, fortunately, I realized in the moment, and that gap was so big and so painful that I said, I got to stop this. and I stopped hanging around with those kids and got back to being who I believed I was, and comfortable in my skin and comfortable in my own self. So my behavior was violating my beliefs, so I changed my behavior, didn't I? I changed my behavior to be more in line with my beliefs and went back to, and maybe I was one of the cool kids or not. In the end, I think I did all right, but I didn't go into those kind of behaviors that really, really bothered me. Let's look at another example. A little later on in my life, I spent 25 years traveling as a businessman, doing marketing consulting all over the world, literally around the globe, and all over the US and Canada, and in Asia and Europe and Singapore and Japan and all kinds of places. But at the same time, I had a young family. And so I thought, wow, now I've got this guilt, because my belief is that a good father is always home with his family, with his kids, right? Tuck them into bed at night. And here I am in hotels in Wichita or Spokane or Dubai. So now I've got a belief about myself that's violating my behavior. I believe that I'm a good father, and a good father is at home every night with his family, and yet my behavior is I'm in hotels all the time. What do I do about that? Because now I've got this gap and I'm feeling guilty, and I got to resolve it in some kind of a way. So now, can I change my behavior? My career, my entire career is based on that. I can't do what I do and what I'm good at by staying at home all the time. Well, these days we have to, don't we? But this was pre-Zoom and pre-Facebook Live. So what I had to do was change my beliefs. And what I did was alter my beliefs and I altered actually both of them. Because on the belief side, I realized and I came to be comfortable with the fact that sometimes you have to be away in order to do your job. But I also modified my behavior slightly, and I never went out to an office. I always, as little as possible, I always had a home office, so that when I wasn't traveling, I could be at home with my sons and be there as they got home from school, whatever. So I spent a great deal of time with them. But by changing and adjusting both the beliefs and the behaviors, I was able to close that gap and get rid of the guilt. Now, whatever it is that you're dealing with, whatever the guilt is that you've got on your mind, you can do the same thing. Understand and examine it and say, all right, what is my behavior? What behavior am I exhibiting right now? And what belief is that violating? Where's the gap in between those two things? And how can I change those? How can I adjust one or the other, or a little bit of both? Now, when we think about behaviors and beliefs, both of these things can be influenced by other people. More often than not, it's the really influential people in your lives. Who are they? They're your parents. They're your teachers. They're your coaches. They're your religious leaders. These are the people that influence your behaviors. They're the ones that taught you, this is how a good boy behaves. This is how a good girl behaves. That's not. That behavior is unacceptable. And then as we grew up and started to come in and into our own beliefs and think for ourselves, then we realized, okay, well, I'm now behaving in alignment with with what I've been taught, and my beliefs have changed a little bit. So we have to be able to recognize where these beliefs and behaviors have come from, because both of them can be heavily influenced by other people. We're going to talk more about that in just a few moments. Now, generally speaking, your beliefs are going to be your own. All right? Doesn't mean always, because very often the beliefs that we carry around, we've been convinced that this is what we're supposed to believe. But deep down inside, you're thinking, no, that just doesn't feel right. That's not who I am. And but for the most part, your beliefs are, down inside there are your own real true beliefs. Your behaviors will always be yours because you always get to choose your behaviors. I mean, I could have, in both those situations, I could, in the 8th grade, I could have chosen to say, no, I won't hang out with these kids. That's not, I could have made that choice. Now, unfortunately, I allowed the beliefs and to override my behavior until the pain reached a point where it was unacceptable anymore and something had to change. In the same way, I could have quit my job, as an adult, 40-year-old person traveling around all the time. I could have said, no, sorry, I'm not going to do this. I'm going to get a job where I go to an office every day. But my belief about myself was, no, this is what I love to do. This is what I want to do. This is what I was meant to do. And so that behavior I wanted to hang on to because it was consistent with a belief that I had about myself. Now, it was inconsistent with another part of my beliefs, but I made some adjustments in order to bring those aligned as well. And that's part of what you can do as well. And so the first step is to find out what it is that you actually believe. And what does that do? In order to, how do we do that? We have to get quiet. I do a 30-minute meditation every single day. And that's where I learn about who I am, because then I still out all the noise that's going on out there, all the shoulds and ought tos that the world's trying to throw at me. And whether it's family or whether it's clients or whether it's the government or whoever it is, all these things are being thrown at you saying this is how you ought to believe. This is what you're supposed to think. That's what advertising and marketing is all about. Here's how you're supposed to think. And if you don't think this way, there's something wrong with you. All right? It's only when you get quiet and quiet that shouting, that noise that goes on in our heads all the time. When you get that quieted down, then you can start to understand what it is that you truly believe about all kinds of things. And you might think about, what do I believe about religion? What do I believe about social justice? We've got an awful lot of debate going on and a lot of really nasty reactions to some very bad thinking. And it's been going on for too long. And the guilt has reached the point where it's unsustainable anymore. So we've got to change our behaviors because we realize that the behaviors that we've been exhibiting as a society are no longer consistent with our beliefs. So we have to change those things. But we're talking about, what do you believe? What do you believe in every area of your life? What do you believe in the financial area of your life? What do you believe in with regard to relationships? What do you believe with regard to your physical fitness and your health? And how are you behaving? So if I believe that my body is something to be looked after, and yet I stuff it full of horrible food all the time and I don't get exercise, then I'm going to feel guilty because there's a gap, isn't there? So what do you truly believe about all the various areas of your life? I love this quote. This is from William Shakespeare, Measure for Measure. Go to your bosom, go to your heart, knock there and ask your heart what it knows. And that's what you have to do to get quiet, is to say, all right, what do I believe? And when you found that true core belief, then you start looking at your behaviors and say, okay, now I'm going to have to make some changes here, and that will make the guilt go away. And of course, we eliminate the guilt by closing the gap. It's very simple. And you have the choices. You have the choice about your beliefs. You have the choice about your behaviors. You have the control over both of those things. And by making those adjustments, we close the gap and the guilt goes away. Now, what do you do if you're feeling guilty about an event that's happened in the past? My example, when I was in the 8th grade, I cannot go back to the 8th grade and undo the bullying that I did on those kids. I can't do that. And so what I need to do is change my belief about the behavior. Now, that does not mean to say that, oh, of course, bullying's just fine. But there's a great little trick that you can use. It's a mind therapy. It's a mini therapy technique that you can use. And the way you do this is by using the phrase except when. So, nice boys don't bully kids who are younger and smaller than them. You're right, they don't. Except when they are 13 years old and testosterone is rushing through their veins and they've completely lost control of, the thing that's controlling them is not them, it's societal pressures. But then as soon as you realize, uh-oh, this is not right, then you change it. So by doing that, I feel bad about it. I wish it hadn't happened, but I don't agonize about it, and I don't carry that guilt around anymore because I understand where the gap came from. I closed the gap a long time ago, and now I can let it go. As a traveling career professional, good fathers are always home at night with their kids. Yeah, except when their job, which they love and that they've been encouraged to take, demands that they be in lots of different places, and when they are at home as often as possible, then it's okay. And with that, I can say, all right, I don't need the guilt anymore. I don't need to carry it around. I don't need to have it drag me down. Now, of course, these are for past events. Going forward, would I bully anybody anymore? Of course not. Would I take on a job that caused me to leave loved ones for long periods of time? Of course not. I wouldn't do that now. So going forward, you can change your behaviors. You can start aligning your behaviors, making the choices that are in line with your beliefs. You see that? It's simply that gap between what I believe and how I act. Close that gap, and the guilt is gone. So why don't we call this first myth? Remember our first myth that guilt is all about your deep, unresolved mommy or daddy issues? No, it's not. It's just about the gap that is between your beliefs and your behavior. Eliminate the gap, and the guilt's gone. So let's call that myth busted, shall we? One down. Let's look at myth number 2. Myth number 2 says, all guilt is bad. It's just society trying to control me. So I shouldn't worry about I should never, ever worry or feel guilty about anything. I can simply ignore it. That also is a myth, because I want to introduce you to something that I like to call beneficial guilt. You didn't know that there was going to be beneficial guilt, did you? But where is? And we can use it to our advantage. There's some huge advantages to this particular kind of guilt. How is this going to work? Well, a sense of guilt can be enormously useful if you discover that you're heading in the wrong direction. Because remember, as soon as we have that gap between your actions and your beliefs, you're going to feel uncomfortable. And that uncomfortable feeling is guilt. And it can be enormously useful. When it pops up, it's saying to you, whoa, just a minute. Something going on here, something wrong. The emotional red light is flashing. I want you to think about it, your sense of beneficial guilt as an emotional and behavioral GPS. You got a GPS in your car. It's so handy. You plug in the destination and you say, this is where I want to go, and it guides you step by step along the way to get to your destination. But what happens if you take a wrong turn? The GPS says recalculating and says, now, make a left up ahead because you've gone off course. It'll tell you right away if you've gone off course. And that's what guilt can do for us. All right, the GPS is wonderful, but it is only useful if you've got an accurate, if it's attached to those satellites that are up there. If it wasn't attached to the satellites and communicating with them, it wouldn't work at all. And your guilt is only useful if you've got an accurate and authentic set of your own beliefs, your true own beliefs. Remember we talked about a minute ago about getting quiet and figuring out, what do I genuinely believe? Because when you've got those in place and you say, these are my beliefs, not somebody else's that have been handed to me, these are my beliefs and what I believe. When that's in place, beneficial guilt is enormously useful to you, because it's like a signal, a flashing red light that says, whoa, 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 something's wrong here. We've got a gap. We've got a difference between your behaviors and your beliefs. And that's what's causing the red light to go on. That's what's causing you to feel guilty. That's what's causing you to feel so uncomfortable. You need to do something. You need to change a belief, or you need to change an action, an activity, a behavior, and the guilt will close up. So that's all you do. We correct our mistakes, because all we have to do is think about it for just a moment, and we can make those corrections. We can say, my behavior is this way, or I need to adjust my course that way. And now you're back on track, and the guilt goes away. And that's the neat thing about beneficial guilt. It's only ever temporary. It only lasts as long as there is a gap. And as soon as you recognize the gap and say, okay, this is unacceptable to me because it's in violation of my beliefs, my actions are in violation of my beliefs, I'm going to change one or the other or both, and then the guilt's gone. I don't need it anymore. The red light stops flashing. I can get back to my joyful, purposeful life, just like you can. So I want you to embrace the beneficial guilt. It's a wonderful self-correcting tool that's built into our emotional system. I've heard it referred to as your emotional guidance system. If you're starting to feel bad, that tells you there's something wrong, that you're off course a little bit and you need to adjust. But as soon as you do, that beneficial guilt just vaporizes and you don't have to worry about it any longer. As opposed to all the other kinds of guilt that you carry around for years. So myth number 2, that all guilt is bad? No. We'll bust that myth too, because there is some guilt, we called it beneficial guilt, that's really, really useful, and you want to pay attention to it. All right, let's move on to myth number 3. Myth number 3 says, whatever I'm feeling guilty about must be all my fault. All right? I must have done something wrong. I must be the bad one. I must be the one who's violating the beliefs and the behaviors. I need to be the one that changes. No, let's bust this myth wide open too, shall we? Because when our beliefs or the behaviors are imposed on you by other people, that can become chronic and destructive and enormously debilitating. And who are the other people that like to put their beliefs and or their behaviors on you? Well, it's parents, it's teachers, it's coaches, it's authority figures, it's religious leaders. There's all kinds of people that tell you this is how you're supposed to behave. This is what you're supposed to think. And if you don't, now you've got this incredible tension. Because, parents, they're the classic ones. You love them, you want to make them happy, and yet they're asking you to do something that violates your beliefs. There's a problem there, and this is where it can become destructive. And we don't want that, so we don't want this destructive guilt. And the way it works is you've got somebody else who's saying, this is how you must behave in order for me to be happy. I'm somehow unhappy right now, and my unhappiness is because you are not behaving the way I want you to behave. And so what do you have to do? And if I can apply enough pressure on you to change the way you're behaving, then my problem's solved, and now you've got the problem, don't you? You're the one that's walking around feeling awful because now you're violating your own beliefs, and you've got more of that guilt. Or if you don't change your beliefs or your behaviors, now I'm laying the guilt trip on you, saying, no, you got to, you must not love me if you're going to behave that way. If you really loved me, you'd do this. Well, I really love you, but I'm still not going to do that because I don't want to do that. That's not what I believe about myself. Because what's happened here is we've introduced a second gap. The first gap, the guilt gap, is between your beliefs and your behaviors, right? The second guilt gap is your beliefs, your own true, genuine beliefs, and the beliefs that you've been told you should have. All right? So, let's face it, we've been through, fortunately, society has woken up to the whole LGBTQ community. Finally, but it wasn't very long ago that we were told this is bad. And if you don't think it's bad, there's something wrong with you. And if inside you said, no, but I love everybody. Everybody is a worthy being. No, you can't think that. So now I've got this second gap, all right, between my beliefs, not just we're not talking my beliefs and my behaviors. I'm talking about my beliefs and what you're telling me I'm supposed to believe. And then on top of it, we've got the additional gap about my behaviors. So this is now getting really messed up. But as soon as we recognize what's going on here, we can start to resolve it, can't we? Because you cannot close your own gap while you're still conforming to the demands that other people are making of you. And those demands can include, here's how you should behave, and they can also include, this is what you should believe. And so those demands made by people who are in authority, who have authority over you or who are influential to you in some kind of a way, that makes it very hard for you. And so we need to find a way. And the first step, of course, is to recognize what's going on. I'm being told, I'm being coerced to have these behaviors. I'm being coerced to have these beliefs. And I don't want either one of them. And so I'm feeling guilty. And of course, this kind of destructive guilt can go on for a long, long time because the gap, it's not in your power to close it, or you don't believe that it's in your power to close it because you want to please this people, and yet they're asking you to do something that violates your beliefs. That can go on and on and on and on and on for a long, long time. But we resolve it in exactly the same way by eliminating the gap. And in this case, two gaps. Right? Let's talk about how we do that. What you need to do is really focus on your beliefs and your behaviors. So saying, okay, what in this situation, I'm being asked to behave this. I'm being asked to believe this. I'm being told to behave this way. I'm being told to believe this. But I want you to, again, get quiet. Close your eyes, get to a very quiet place on a regular basis and say, what do I really believe about this? Regardless of what somebody else is telling me. And by getting quiet, you can start to separate those things out and you can get that clarity in your own mind of, okay, this is what I truly believe. I get it that I'm being pressured by others, but now I've recognized my own genuine beliefs. And I've recognized my own preferences about my behaviors too. So list yourself, sit down quietly. What do you truly believe about finances? What do you truly believe about relationships? What do you truly believe about your health? What do you truly believe about your career and your own personal growth? What are those true beliefs that you have? Not what everybody else is telling you, not what the world is shouting at you. This is where you start gaining tremendous strength by recognizing your own true beliefs because they are valid. They're tremendously valid. They are yours. They're authentic. And you're worthy of having those beliefs. So then, when you've recognized them, now you can begin to act in alignment with those beliefs. And when you do, that guilt gap goes away again, and we've unburdened ourselves from the guilt. Now, of course, what we're having to do is sidestep the guilt that they're trying to impose on you. Because, you say, okay, now I've realized what I believe and how I realize what my behavior ought to be. And so I'm going to act consistently with that. But now I got this third party saying, oh, no, you shouldn't believe that. You shouldn't behave that way. You're hurting my feelings. You must not love me. You must not be a good citizen or a good employee or a good brother or sister or daughter or son or whatever. Right? So they're trying to put that gap back in for you, aren't they? Recognize when that's going on. Now, it can be challenging because now we run into the next challenge, which is the opinions of other people. What are some, here's some classic ones. A good daughter calls her mother all the time, if not every day, then certainly once a week, if not more frequently. And, God bless all the mothers out there, and fathers do it too, but aren't they good? Aren't we good at laying that guilt on people that's saying, oh, I haven't talked to you for so long. That's, it can be very subtle, but that's what we do. And it comes through and we feel it and saying, okay, there's that trying to pull me away from my beliefs and my behaviors. Mom, Dad, I love you to death, but once a week is too much for me. That's okay. A good parent spends time with their kids. But good parents also have a whole lot of other obligations and have their own interests too. And if that's all you ever do, you can build up resentment. And so we have to learn, what do I believe? I believe that a good parent spends time with their kids, but I also believe that a good parent practices self-care and doesn't exhaust themselves and build up that resentment that comes from being overly demanded of. An organized person gets everything done. Their desk is nice and clean at the end of every day. Uh-oh, I feel guilty about this, right? But these are the things that are being imposed on us. And we can decide for ourselves what we want and how we want to behave and what we want to believe. And the good thing is that once you've been able to isolate that source of guilt, you can decide what you want to do with it. You can decide how you want to handle it. Now I see where the guilt gap exists. It's between what I believe and what I'm doing. How frequently I think I should call my mother and how frequently I am actually calling my mother or my daughter or how tidy my desk is at the end of the workday. Whatever it is, isolate it. And you do that by getting quiet and thinking and saying, I found it. I found where that gap exists. Now, what do I want to do with it? There you go. Now, bit of self-plugging here, right? When we run into that anxiety that's created by the fact that, the boss still thinks you should be doing it this way, but I don't want to. Now we've got anxiety. And I'm going to talk in a couple of minutes in more detail about this this online course that we have called Unsubscribe from Anxiety to help you. Now we've got rid of the guilt, but now I've got anxiety from all these people that are leaning on me. And I would love for you, and I've got a very, very special offer for you. I'm going to just tonight, and I'm going to explain that in a few minutes. But the fact is that we don't have to carry that anxiety around either. And if you're discovering that when I let go of the guilt, the anxiety comes in, that's not a problem. We can get rid of that too. So when we take that third myth, that everything that, if I'm feeling guilty, it's because I've done something wrong, absolutely not. When you're feeling guilty and someone else has imposed their beliefs on you or their behaviors on you and they violate your own personal beliefs, that's where the guilt comes from, and it is not yours. That does not mean it's your fault. You're behaving authentically. Those other people have no right to impose on you their beliefs and saying that this is how, if they want those beliefs for themselves, that's great. They're welcome to them, but they're not welcome to impose them on you. So now we've got these three big myths that we've blown up. The first one that, guilt is somehow some terribly deep psychological problem. No, it's not. It's just a gap between your beliefs and your behaviors. Close it up, guilt's gone. The second myth was that, oh, guilt is bad and I can ignore it completely. No, some guilt is really useful. We call that beneficial guilt. And that's the internal stuff, and you can resolve that, and the guilt's gone that fast. And the third myth said that, anything that I'm feeling guilty about, it must be my fault. I must be the wrong one. I must be the bad one here. No, not at all. People are constantly trying to get us to believe this or that or the other thing that's in violation of our beliefs. And if you're to be authentic with yourself, be authentic with your own beliefs and your own actions. All right, how do we live this guilt-free life? How do we sustain it? How do we go on? Well, I want you to resolve right here, right now, that you're going to use, well, I called it guilt, but I changed my mind. Let's use our conscience constructively, shall we? Let's take what we've learned of these steps and use it in a very constructive manner. Let's let us use this consciousness, this gap, this flashing red light, this emotional GPS. Let's use it to guide us to the destination that we've chosen. Because when we use it, it's a fantastic guide, just like the GPS in your car. It'll get you there. And your emotions can get you there too. Your emotional and behavioral GPS will get you right to where you want to go, as long as you're behaving authentically. So what do? There are 8 steps, and I want you to follow these 8 steps. Step number 1, recognize the guilt. And that's easy to recognize because it's that painful feeling that comes up inside because of this gap between our beliefs and our behaviors. That's step 1. Recognize what's going on. You can say, uh-oh, I'm feeling kind of yucky here. What? Oh yeah, I'm feeling guilty. Number 2, listen accurately. And listen to what? Listen to your inner voice. That quiet inner voice. And you're going to have to go off by yourself and get quiet for a little while. Close your eyes and think, all right, what do I truly believe? Filter out all that noise that's coming from all those other sources, all those other people. Listen accurately to your own voice and your own beliefs. And then analyze what you discovered and pinpoint the source. Where is the gap existing right now? What is my belief? What is my behavior? And what's the gap between them? Now I know exactly where this sense of guilt is coming from. Then I'll decide if it's valid. And if I decide that, okay, the gap is coming from my behavior and a belief that somebody else is trying to impose on me, that's not valid. If it's a gap between my own personal beliefs and my own behaviors, then it's valid. And I want to do something about it. But you get to decide, is this worth paying attention to? If it's not valid, if it's being imposed by somebody else, you can safely ignore it and the red light goes out. But if it is valid, if you say, yeah, this is between my beliefs and my behaviors, I want to change it. Decide that. Do you want to change it? Okay. What do you do next? Act to change. Change the behavior, change the belief. Change a little bit of each, and the gap will close. And as soon as that gap closes, you can let it go. Because it's done. It's served its purpose. The GPS has you back on the right course, and there's nothing to worry about. That's all you need to do. It's all about the gap. Now, I want to ask you a question. Let me ask you a quick question here, all right? If it's this easy to let go of guilt, and it truly is, and anything that's popping up in your mind saying, no, but you don't understand it, then we're just making excuses. It is actually quite easy when we recognize our genuine, our authentic beliefs and our behaviors. Close the gap, the guilt's gone. Anything else is stuff that's being imposed on you by others. And you're giving into that. It is that easy to let go of guilt. But if it's this easy to let go of guilt, what would it be like to get rid completely of anxiety? of worry, of fear, of self-doubt. Do you ever wake up in the night worrying? Do you ever wake up in the middle of the night worrying about your finances, worrying about your relationships, worrying about your health, worrying about your future? Do you ever do that? Or do you ever find yourself in the middle of the day, just, oh, I'm getting kind of stressed and anxious here? Do you not want to resort, and if your anxiety is to a point where this is getting kind of out of control, I don't want to take Xanax. I don't want to take Paxil. I don't want to take prescription drugs to control my anxiety. All that's doing is altering my brain chemistry, and I'm smarter than that. I don't need to do that. That was one of the things that I was so proud of myself about, is when I found myself worried into homelessness, I said, no, I'm smarter than this. I don't need medication to address this. I can solve this problem. And so can you. The problem, one of the things about worry and anxiety, if they're left unchecked, they can cause you health problems. There's something else to worry about, shall we? Would you like to stop worrying? Would you like to let go of anxiety completely? Well, how about this? Let's just play with our imaginations for a minute. If you had no anxiety whatsoever, no worries, no fears, what would you try to do? What would you take on? What would you attempt if you knew that whatever you took on, you could succeed at? What would you try if you said, no, I don't have to worry about that. I don't have to worry about the money. I don't have to worry about my health. I'm completely anxiety-free. What are the things that you try? Would you go back to school and finish that degree that you always promised yourself? Would you say, no, I'm going to start that business that I want? Would you start training for a marathon? What would you try if you said, I don't have to worry about any of it? So just ask yourself some what-if questions. What if you could wake up every single morning just absolutely overflowing with joy and saying, wow, I can't wait for this day. It's going to be such a great day every single morning. What would you do if you had the confidence to know that no matter what it is that you took on, you could cope with it? Whatever the challenges that they could throw at you, you'd be just fine. Right? What would you try? What if you knew that no matter what it was, it's going to work out? Can you imagine that feeling? That feeling just welling up in you of saying, yeah, I can do this. What if you could just focus on nothing except the beautiful and wonderful aspects of your lives and not all that nasty stuff? What if you could do that? Well, I'm living proof that you can go from complete and utter homelessness and worrying about everything to living a life that is completely and utterly worry-free and anxiety-free. Yes, stuff still happens to me, stuff comes at me, but I don't worry about any of it, and I would love to share this with you. I want to show you how to do this, because you can opt out of anxiety. You can get rid of it. It is not required. It is not part of who you are. It's normal, meaning everybody else does it, but it doesn't mean it's natural or required. Normal is obese in this country. That's normal now, but does it mean it's good? No, it isn't. And you don't have to be that. So you can get rid of anxiety. And I want to offer you right now my signature online course, Unsubscribe from Anxiety. I wrote the book last year. It got published in October of last year called Unsubscribe from Anxiety. And I built this 7-module course around this thing. And this 7-module course normally sells for $995. But for you only who is participating in this Guilt-Free Today program, I'm making it available to you for a very limited time, and by that I mean by Friday night, 85% off, all right? The entire course, all 7 modules, the videos, the course manual, the guided exercises, for less than $150. Instead of $995, it's less than $150, okay? 85% off. That's saving almost $850. And what do you get in return for that? You get a worry, anxiety-free life. You can go to I-fearless.com/unsubscribe-online. And I'll be making all this available to you. I'll send you all this information, but you have to register by this Friday. All right, there's a coupon. I'm going to give you the coupon code in just a second. The coupon expires on Friday, so you got to act before that. All right, enter the coupon guilt-free. Go to the website. You don't even have to remember all that. Just go to the I-Fearless website, I-fearless.com. On the homepage, you can see the Unsubscribe from Anxiety online course. Click on that. When you register for it, just use the coupon code guilt-free, and you will save 85%. All right, enough about that. And I realize, thank you so much. I've gone a little bit over my time, but I want to talk about what's coming next. Our next program, this is another one that we all deal with all the time. 2 weeks from today, Tuesday, July 21st, we're going to be talking about how to free yourself from the opinions of others. You know, I think that's one of the most common anxieties, is worrying what other people think of us. You do that? Oh man, that is so common. So many people do it. I used to do it all the time with terrified, and of course that alters my behaviors, doesn't it? Because if I think somebody's going to approve of me, I gave that example when I was in the 8th grade. Because I was so worried what other people thought of me, I adjusted my behaviors to the point where I didn't know who I was. It wasn't who I am. So if you want to free yourself from the opinions of others and just live and say, no, the only person I'm pleasing is me. All right? You've probably heard that phrase, what you think of me is none of my business. Well, that's easy to say. How do you do it? I want you to join me not next week, 2 weeks from now, Tuesday, July 21st, how to free yourself from the opinions of others. Well, folks, that is the end of that. Let me just come back here for a second so you can have nothing but me. There we go. I have thoroughly enjoyed myself with you. I'm sorry, it looks like I've gone about 7.5 minutes over my time that I promised you. I hope you got a lot out of this. These are the ways that you can get guilt out of your life completely, and you don't need to carry that sack of guilt around with you anymore. You just don't need it. So please, God bless you. Enjoy your guilt-free life. It's been a blast being with you guys. Thanks so much. We'll see you again next time.